Hey everyone, and welcome to Private Podcast, where we plug in and explore the intersection of privacy, human rights, technology, and democracy. I'm your host, Derek Silva. Today we are speaking with Berhan Taye. Berhan is the Senior Advisor, Internet Governance and Policy at Internews, and is a co-host of the Terms and Conditions podcast. She actually has an incredible resume that I could spend the next 3 or 4 minutes going through, but instead I'm going to say, Berhan, thanks for taking the time to be here today.
Thanks for having me.
Terrific. Before we dive into some of the work you're doing right now, you had an opportunity to speak with Vijaya Gade, who is the head of legal policy and trust at Twitter during RightsCon. What were your biggest takeaways from that conversation?
To be honest, the fact that she wasn't a robot, like she answered as a human does. These
Yes.
companies, when you engage with them, they don't feel like they're humans. So I really appreciated that, she wasn't the terms and conditions of Twitter that you are reading. Rather, she was like, yeah, those are difficult things that we have to deal with,
Yeah.
and she was able to sort of accept the fact that, I was pushing her, and asking difficult questions. So she didn't shy away from that. I mean, she also came. That's also the big part, right? Like, so these companies don't want to come to the spaces. So yeah, I mean, she showed up and answered the questions. I was very happy, and she was really pleasant as well.
Yeah, she was. We had some miscommunication at a previous attempt to record this. You were actually on live during RightsCon when I thought you would be joining me here at Private Podcast. So
Yeah.
in my search to figure out what was going on, I was like, oh, she's supposed to be speaking at RightsCon, and it's literally happening right now. Why don't I jump in there and see what's going on? Ta-da! There's Berhan talking with Vijaya about great topics. I use Twitter a lot. It is at this point my preferred centralized social network, and you're right. Yeah, it props to her for showing up, speaking like a human. Not hiding behind legal speak, which I'm sure in many other scenarios she would prefer to do. And yeah, you asked tough questions, and she did acknowledge that things are not perfect at Twitter, that there's way more work to do, and a variety of other things. I'm not going to take away from RightsCon's revenue because they're a nonprofit. So if you're interested in more, go find RightsCon's content and listen or watch that. In the meantime, you and I are. I want to dive into some of the work you're doing and who you're working with. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. Well, okay. So these days I'm working with an organization called Internews. So I lead the digital rights work of this consortium called the Global Internet Freedom Consortium. So basically, what we do is that we work in more than 39 countries now, trying to advocate for digital rights and digital security or digital safety of users in those countries.
Cool. That's great. That's obviously very important work. It's been disheartening to see some of the places that I think need access to information most be the ones where often internet shutdowns happen the most, or things are the most censored. And obviously, as a straight white guy living in Canada, I feel like it should be the exact opposite, especially in those places. I run into misinformation all the time. I'm savvy enough to help figure out the website I'm on that somebody shared a link to is probably full of BS. But
Mm.
you only get to that point by hitting a lot of it in a lot of ways, or reading about how to figure out what's not true and what's more likely to be true, even though, I think it's hard to get to 100% truth. Um, so in terms of the work you're doing then, so some of the challenges you've come across in protecting and advancing people's access to trustworthy news and information?
Um, so a lot of the context is, a lot of my experience is out of North America and Europe. So in a place like, for instance, let's say Ethiopia or like Myanmar, where for 30 years you've had press freedom violated, journalists killed, journalists arrested. It's a whole pile of just human rights violations, freedom of expression violations, many of those, things that you wouldn't normally think about, right? Like now, then you add, the space opens up. You have platforms like Facebook and Twitter, others that are providing providing people the option to speak. They're providing them with another platform that's not necessarily controlled by the government, but is controlled by another
Right.
entity. Then now you have governments using that. So basically, what governments do is that they shut down, press media houses, right? They would physically go to a printing press, and they would turn off the lights, take the plates, shut the whole thing, arrest everybody, then you move on to the next one. Now, a lot of people have been, of course, in a lot of these places, Twitter, Facebook, and other platforms were the source of alternative information, not alternative facts, but alternative
Yeah.
narratives that, people were not able to access. But then, of course, governments were able to catch up to that, right? Like they saw the tools that, you can organize for good using Facebook. You can also organize for bad. And it's not about, it's not bad versus good. It's not it's not simple
Right.
like that, right? Like, so people can organize in many different ways using these tools. So now the issue with misinformation, disinformation that we're seeing is that in a place where the government has controlled the narrative for so many years, now you add the issue of that narrative also going around on social media platforms. How do you how do you tell people what's right and wrong, what's true or false? Like a lot of the conversations that I have with my family and other folks is that, yeah, anyone can make a YouTube video. For a lot of places, digital literacy is not that high. So the fact that an organized group can make a YouTube video look like a news and share it is just like mind blowing for a lot of people. Like, so it's that basic stuff that you have to meet in terms of providing people with digital literacy, digital skills. But then it's also really super sophisticated stuff that's organized misinformation, disinformation by government. So it really ranges within that, and it's not easy
Yeah.
navigating that.
In some, when you're talking about chatting with family and making sure that they understand that anybody can make one of these videos. I mean, I have tools that with templates and stuff like that that are available for free or very inexpensively. I made for a fun thing. I made a really sophisticated looking intro to my at the time my 6 year old's hockey game because we wanted to because of the pandemic only a certain amount of parents could be in the arena at any one point in time, and of course they're missing out, and so somebody recorded the whole game. So that part does not look super sophisticated because it was off of somebody's iPhone or an Android device. But the intro looked super cool, had good music, etc. And we made it an unlisted video on YouTube just so the parents could watch. But if you with a little bit more equipment, green screen, better lighting, etc. You can get there with maybe a couple $1,000s, and potentially be fooling people left, right, and center if that's your intent. So yeah, it's definitely something I need to watch out for. Even with some of my friends who are in their 20s and 30s, they still, while my generation and probably yours too is supposed to be more digital savvy, I've run into people who are being fooled or being fed information that they just simply share, and I'm like, what's your source for that? Like, where did this information come from? Don't put it in your Instagram story unless you can link to the original thing. Like, I don't want to see this unless you can actually show
Yeah,
me where you got it, because this sounds
yeah.
like BS. um
Yeah, and I mean, in many ways, look at, I mean, everybody wants to, crap on America, but hey, they can't have themselves. But look at the past, the 4 years that they had. It was like, of course, there's been many years of difficulty in the U.S., but now just looking at the amount of conspiracy theories, the amount of, alternative facts, these platforms are at the core of it. It's not like, I'm not trying to say that, misinformation, disinformation did not exist before the internet. It did, but just the way that, it has divided communities, I think even way more worse than ours. I think what was really visible was like in the past few years in the US, in the past few years, you look at Germany, you look at France, a lot of these places, especially that have, right wing movements, definitely. I'm super left, socialist, liberal, whatever you call it. So I'm like, like a lot of those places have been struggling, and a lot of misinformation, disinformation, the conspiracy theories, the fact that we're denying science is not coming out of the blue. It's being,
yeah, it's
So I think across borders, like that's an issue that we're all dealing with. But the question then becomes, it's, like, how do you talk to your family? Like, majority of the time, the conversation with my mom and dad has been, where did you, like, my mom used to get really annoyed at some point. I'm like, where did you hear that information from? And she's like, Facebook. I'm like, mom, that doesn't, like, no. She's like,
Who are you
but
following on
so
Facebook,
just,
mom? Cut it out.
it's a whole, exactly. So, like, yeah, so it's all of those things. But one thing that's unique, I guess, in the, I'm Ethiopian. So in the Ethiopian context is also, the satellite TVs, the network TVs are also the main source of misinformation, disinformation, where, in a place that only has 20% internet penetration, people download that video and put it in a USB stick. So that's the USB stick that goes around the village to sort of, pass on the real and the latest conspiracy theory on the shelf. So there's also, like, FM stations are also really,
Yeah.
one of the culprits of misinformation, disinformation, at least in the space that I am in. So it's a problem with our generation, I think.
So SneakerNet strikes again. I guess I'm kind of nostalgic for hearing the fact that somebody's literally putting in information on a small piece of storage media and running it around. I mean, like, that was literally the first way to network 30, 40 years ago. I guess we're
Yes.
really approaching 40, almost 50. But it was big, huge floppy disks that were actually floppy, and being passed from computer to computer to share a program or data or what have you. I just wish it was being done for a better context. Oh shoot, I had a question to ask. I'll come back to it if I remember what it is. Um, you mentioned the Global Internet Freedom Consortium. You're part of that organization working to strengthen digital rights and safety in 50 countries. Um, you're the digital rights expert. Can you tell us a little bit more about what that work actually looks like day to day and what you're looking to achieve?
So basically, so we have regional partners in Latin America, Asia, Central Asia, Africa. What am I missing? I think that's all. Yeah. So all of those five regional partners. So basically, what we do, and my role is to really to be of service to our regional partners. To say, for instance, in Uganda, they're dealing with a data protection bill that has been passed in Parliament but has not yet been implemented. And then now we're sitting down and, okay, so what are the digital rights, the data protection issues that we have in this country? How can we push the government, nudge them in the right direction to actually implement this thing? How do we frame it so that it's in their interest to be able to do that? So it's sitting with partners, new issues, new topics every day because we're dealing with a lot of countries. But it's trying to figure out and strategize how do we protect fundamental human rights like the right to privacy, the right to access to information, the right to freedom of expression, and in different ways. So that's basically what we do.
Cool. That's great to hear. And let's talk about your podcast. You have one as well. It's called Terms and Conditions. What sort of topics do you cover?
Well, okay. So Terms and Conditions is a podcast that I'm doing with my friend Nima Iyer. She's pretty cool, Ugandan and Indian. No, she's Tanzanian and Indian. My God, she'll kill me when she hears this that I mistakenly called her a Ugandan. Uh, sorry, Nima.
You're putting out
Anyways,
misinformation now,
but
Berhan. Come on.
right? I know. It's so unfair. Yeah, so basically our podcast is like, we listen to Reply All and many others, but like, a lot of these podcasts are about America and how the world revolves around America and like how everyone is like, life experiences are all, coming out of Brooklyn and that's not our life experience. We're not from there. So we were trying to sort of go like, okay, there are issues that her and I like, we get on a call and talk for like an hour. So we're like, this could actually be interesting as a podcast. So we started that as a pilot. So we've done our second season. Now we're gearing up to do the third season. So it's talking about the same issues that you and I are talking about: data privacy, surveillance, digital ID. It's also about, can I say this? Bitching about governments that we don't like and the policymakers that really annoy us. So it's just a conversation between her and I, and sometimes we bring interesting people to talk to.
Great. Thanks for sharing that. Can I get a little bit more of your thoughts and your biggest concerns about governments increasingly shutting down internet access? These are often to disrupt protests block illegal content, whatever that means, depending on the jurisdiction, and often to censor journalism as well.
Yeah. So internet shutdowns are increasing every year, right? Like, so that's a problem. So basically, but I think it's important to also define what internet shutdowns are.
Sure.
Like, so governments would basically turn off the internet. Like, as you and I are speaking now, it will just go off. You don't know when it's coming back. Uh, it most likely won't come back until either the protest, the election, or something the government's trying to do is sort it out. So which is really problematic, right? Like, so forget human rights. Think about the business that you do. Like, we're all online working these days. Like, so my colleague in Sudan, for instance, there's exams this week, so she is offline between 8 a.m. and I think midday every day for the whole week. So imagine not being able to work, not being able to take your exams. It's really crazy. Or like, there's protests being organized around many issues. The government will just decide to shut down the internet just like that. And it's way much more common than we would like it to be, right? Like, so India is the world's number one culprit when it comes to internet shutdowns.
We hear that a lot.
Like countries like Ethiopia, yeah, Sri Lanka. It really is terrible. And I've lived under a shutdown where you're like, and especially if you're working offline, like I had to travel to other countries to work. That's how bad it is. But then now, when you look at it from a human rights point of view, I always like to phrase the question: what happens when the internet goes off? Because like, let's forget about why does the internet go off, but like let's investigate what happens on the ground when the internet goes off.
Right.
When the internet goes off, people die. When the internet goes off, police and law enforcement agencies use excessive use of force. When the internet goes off, elections are, stolen. The fact that, like, so there's not a direct correlation, but more when an election is happening and when the government shuts off the internet, you can definitely suspect fraud there. So when the internet goes off, massive human rights violations happen, like in places like, for instance, Tigray in Ethiopia, where there's an active conflict. The internet has been shut off, and a lot of people have died. So, when you're trying to do human rights work, you're unable to document the violations that are happening. You're unable to understand the reality on the ground. It also means that you're not able to reach your families. The internet doesn't go off on a normal Tuesday when you're sitting and you're sipping your coffee. That's not when it happens. It happens when there's a massive national event in your country, like mostly very chaotic, and there's a violence and crisis. So more and more governments are using that option to shut off the internet. And what's really for us, what's really concerning is that it's not just authoritarian governments that are shutting down the internet. India is or used to be a democracy. It's a bit hard to tell what India is anymore. But India shutting off the internet is really problematic. And then now you go to the US. During the last government's administration, there were attempts to shut off TikTok and WeChat.
Yeah.
We can speculate about why that is, but for me, that's a form of censorship. Whether you do it because of business reasons or political, at the end of the day, you're censoring people. And then, of course, you think about like the revenue that is lost from the digital economy, but like from everyday lives of individuals. So the fact that more and more governments are just heading in that direction is extremely, extremely concerning. And it has become very simple to turn off the internet, and it has been normalized in a very scary way.
Yeah, I agree. It's I don't obviously I don't like the fact that it happens so often, and that these governments seem to think like it's no big deal when yeah, like you said, often they are just looking to cover up something or prevent more people from finding out. I'm curious, especially with situations like the one in northern Ethiopia, right? With
Yeah.
the conflict there, I guess the province that wants to break away from what I read or what I recall. Um, is it just that they're trying to prevent it from from trying to prevent people from finding out about it in real time? So like you're not going to see a live stream on Facebook or Twitter because we've turned off the internet for a little while. Like or is that also preventing journalists from even finding out that there's something, and therefore there's something to
Mm.
cover and then to write about it even if it doesn't hit the newspaper until the next day?
Yeah. So I will admit the the situation in northern Ethiopia and Tigray is very intricate, and so which makes even this conversation very difficult personally for me because I'm Ethiopian and all of the stuff that we've seen.
Sure.
But the issue is the government has said they did not shut down the internet. It's the TPLF or the former ruling elite group that has shut down the internet. The government even has come out and shown us a CCTV camera of the group coming in and shutting down the internet. There's no way to verify if it was true or
Are they
not.
all
So
wearing
it's
big
very complex.
logos? Like, like, oh,
No,
these are
no,
clearly
it's
the
more
bad
in like
guys.
no, well, it's
Like,
more
look, he's wearing a
so
hat. Like,
so like the telecoms office was like raided at night. They could see, the telecom said this were not, and the telecom is of course owned by the government. So this were not, individuals that are affiliated with them. It's very complex. So I will definitely
sure.
admit that it's not easy. And the government doesn't tell us they shut down the internet themselves previously or haven't shown us any other CCTV cameras. So it's really hard. So, but the claim is also, the TPLF or the former elite group has also come out and said, we're the ones that have started the war. The government, it is a lot. It's really complex. But at the core of it, what's happening on the ground is that whoever shut off the internet, whether it's TPLF or the government, the reality is that people are not able to access information. If you're based out of Addis or anywhere else that's not Tigray, you're not able to reach your families. There's an active conflict where jets are flying, bombing stuff. so I think for me that's what really counts. The issue is there's a lot of disagreement about what happened in Tigray and what's happening currently. And it's also that we underestimate the effect of live streaming conflict happening, incidents happening. We've seen, of course, the amount of impact it can bring. The other issue also that we have, especially in a conflict like that, is the narrative is watered down, right? Like, so when you get the information fresh, like on the day it happens, and 4, 5, 6, 7 days later, it's not the same.
Sure. Yeah.
There are reports that indicate that in that region, before certain killings were done, the group that was going, and doing this egregious crime went around and collected people's SIM cards so that they would not be able to record or they would not be able to call people for. So that's sort of, for me, that's why the internet is important. It's like, yes, we all love Netflix, or yes, we all love to do this, but at the core of it, especially when it comes to human rights, what really matters is being able, if not, forget justice. I don't think we're ever going to get justice in the ways that we want, but at least from history and for archiving purposes to know what actually happened, it's really important. So that's what it does, especially in a conflict like Ethiopia.
Fair enough. Fair enough. I can definitely see why getting that information days later just puts a I guess a damper on any ability to do something about it. Obviously, it's already passed, and and yeah, certainly knowing that something is happening live, jets, anti-aircraft guns and etc. potentially going off. Certainly, knowing in the moment has a variety of potential impact, good and bad. Especially good if you can get out, or at least to hide.
Yes.
In worst case scenario, hide somewhere, whether it's a bunker you've dug or a neighbor's house that's maybe you feel is a little bit more secure or something like that. I think it's just a good time to remember that anybody who's listening to this and feels relatively secure, you have it really good. Like, it's this past year and a half has been all sorts of inconvenient and annoying and lots of other things, but like at the same time, the chances that you're living through a conflict like this is slim, thankfully. So yeah. Uh, you're also part of the Keep It On movement, hashtag Keep It On, which I guess comes right back to this. Can you tell us a little bit about that fight? Where did it start? Do you feel like it's gaining traction and recognition?
Yeah, so this was, the Keep It On hashtag Keep It On campaign was started back in 2016. It's an Access Now coordinated and initiated campaign, and I used to be formerly with Access Now. Started in 2016, actually at RightsCon, where we saw this patterns and trends of internet shutdowns happening in different places. and people gathered there. Now we were like, we need to exactly define what this is, because the speculation of whether is it a social media shutdown, is it, how do you define that? It was like an issue. So that was defined, the coalition was set up, and I had the opportunity to lead that coalition and campaign for a year and something. I'm still part of the community. I'm still part, I feel like we're all part of that because we experience shutdowns every day. So basically, what it does is that we call the community like has a calendar, a tracker that tries to identify what are the things that trigger a shutdown. So we know a protest, an election, school exams, violence, and other things, are the ones that trigger a shutdown. So how do you organize before a shutdown happens? Because there's not much you can do once you've lost the internet to connect the rest of the world.
Right.
So what are the things that you need to put in? What are the ways that, the other thing is it's really difficult to document a shutdown as well, right? Like, so your internet can be having a really terrible day, and you will get a message from your service provider saying, oh, we're doing some construction in this area, so your internet is slow. So you'd assume your internet is slow, but there's a massive protest happening outside and you're unable to stream because your internet has been slowed down, for instance. So being able to put in methodologies, really doing the legwork of what needs to be done is what the coalition is doing. But it's also about naming and shaming governments for the things that they're doing, but then also asking the key question: what happens when the internet goes off? And we know what happens when the internet goes off. Human rights violations happen. So that's what the campaign does. That's what the community does. And I mean, it has upset many governments, which is always a good thing.
I think that means you're doing a good job. Yeah.
Yes, and it has had really good conversations with governments to talk about the list of issues they face and sometimes how they feel like they're forced to shut down the internet. It has had a very really good work done with telcos and service providers, because they're forced to comply in some ways, right? Like, so how can you push back on this? What does compensation for an internet loss mean? How do we document the stories of victims of internet shutdowns? Right, like, so I think for me, one of the very exciting work actually that we worked on, forget the rest of the world, was in the US, where they were like, there were people were freaking out saying like, oh my goodness, like the internet could actually be shut down when TikTok and WeChat were challenged in that way.
Right.
So it's like looking at, the Telecommunications Act and saying, okay, these are the loopholes that certain bad actors can use to shut down the internet. So that's basically what we do for the rest of the world. So this is really, truly, honestly, to say there's no country is immune from a shutdown, right? Like, so how do we make sure we put in the right procedures, the right, oversight for it not to happen? And if it does happen, so that it at least compensate the people that it has affected. That's what the work, the work of the coalition, the community is.
Cool. Thank you. I remember the question I wanted to ask earlier, and you just brought it up again. I historically have been, uh, I've preferred when news organizations uh, present the information and kind of keep opinion out of it.
Mm-hmm.
There's a place for opinion. It's usually the op-ed articles and stuff like that, or pundits appearing on camera, typically. But I thought what was really interesting, uh, I guess throughout most of 2020, maybe the end of 2019 and into 2020, was a lot of American news outlets starting to call what the president was saying lies. Like, oh well, President Trump is falsely claiming this, or is once again telling his supporters this incorrect or misinformation. I thought that was really interesting, and at the time felt necessary, but I don't know if it's something I want to see going forward, only because we don't know how future world leaders will behave. Never mind just the U.S. The American president. Is that something that any organizations you've seen like elsewhere have started to do, like, or just saying like President whomever is falsely claiming that bleach cures COVID-19, like? And if so,
Yeah.
are they getting in legal trouble? Are they getting thrown in jail? Like, it's have you seen that elsewhere?
That's really interesting because like it's how do
News
I
is
put it
supposed to be like,
without
historically,
sounding like
news is
an
just
ass?
news, right? Like the news anchor shows up
No,
on
but
your.
news, but here's the thing: news is never the news. Like, so for me, like, given where I grew up and the things that I've listened to, there's no news that's just news.
Sure,
You
sure.
know, like, so the way you choose what makes it to the top headline, the headline
Oh,
that you
of
write,
course.
everything, like the way everything is,
If it bleeds, it
is
leads.
manufactured. Yeah, so for me, it's like in a lot of ways when the U.S. and the rest of the world got to that point where they were like, oh, we don't trust our president and what he's talking about. I'm like, okay, but you don't. So what's actually quite disappointing was that for 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 a press freedom that had been apparently built for the past 400 years and for democracy, for institutions, you had nothing in your pocket, like in your toolbox, as somebody I know says, to deal with that situation that that the media and the press was in, right? Like, so for me, our journalists are better trained on how to sift through the fake news, the propaganda, and the rest. What's really fascinating for me was that um, I would say, Russians are much better at knowing when a government is lying to them than Americans are. Because I'm sorry to take the conversation there,
Oh,
but
it's fine.
it's no, but I'm like it's because of this, this assumption, trust that we have in democracy that like looking at that, like the paradox that people were experiencing in the U.S. with the news and with calling out a lie is a lie. Yeah, like news is manufactured in so many ways. The fact that we've chosen to talk about certain things is also is you're also playing the game. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
Like the issues that should be front news are not front news because people don't care about them, or like the news editors don't really see that to be an issue. So I would see it in this way, where, for instance, when American television is talking about Palestine, and I don't know how familiar you are with the whole situation,
Enough
that's
to know
actually
that the
not news.
situation is
They're
terrible.
actually presenting their yes, they're actually presenting their opinions
Right.
rather than presenting the fact and the reality on the ground. And then so looking at the fact that now they were pushed to say, oh, he is lying, this is not right, this is the falsely claiming. It took them a while to catch up to that, but so my question for them and for the rest of the the press in that space is, how have you adjusted to be able to tell the lies that the Biden government is also making, right? Like, so because this has this this really blind assumption that things are okay until the president that you don't like comes on is not gonna it's not how at least the media in my space that I'm in and the different countries that live under a different form of dictatorship or form of regime are adapting. So it's just this, we were all saying, welcome America, welcome to the table of learning how your government is lying to
Yeah,
you.
yeah. I think what I thought was really funny was, I'm pretty sure there was a Canadian journalist hired by the Washington Post, um, right after
Mm-hmm.
Donald Trump was elected, and basically his entire job was to count how many times Trump lied, like provably. And there were days where it was in the dozens. Like, oh well, President Trump just had a press conference, and him and his advisors, or him and his press secretary, lied about 37 times through that press conference. I was like, this has
Yeah.
to be the worst job. Or at least one of the worst jobs that I can think of right now. There are worse jobs, obviously, but like,
Yeah.
just for that was literally his day job of like, okay, what's his name? Robert Dale, Bob Dale, Dale something. I
Mm-hmm.
know Dale is in there somewhere. Where it's just like, it's got to be mind numbing to do, especially after 4 years. I don't know what he's doing now, but yeah, that sort of thing
Telling the
is
truth.
actually, I was gonna say it's a thankless job. He actually got lots of thanks on Twitter, typically, for people to be like, "Thank you so much for counting.
Yeah.
I lost count, so thank you for keeping count." How many times there was a lie, a provable lie, spoken in that press conference. Um, So I guess back to the original question, like it do do you know of other news outlets who treat the people in power similarly, like or are they, more or less like afraid of what would happen if they did that sort of thing, if they said like, oh, prime minister whomever,
Um,
I don't know, it could be in Namibia, it could be in Sri Lanka, like are they able to call out their leaders there, or do they have to
so
just
it
kind of
depends.
present everything as is?
So it depends on the context and from one country to
Sure.
the other. So for instance, in a place like Kenya, uh, you know there's a limit that you can go to, right? Like so there's a certain limit that you can go to, and beyond that, that's not accepted. Where I know like journalists would pass on the information that they have to other international media or other folks so that they won't be targeted. So you always have to play that game, right? Like so there are places like, for instance, in Tanzania where the previous president who recently passed away, had arrested journalists. Has it's like there's a journalist that disappeared that nobody knows what happened to. So just because for writing about corruption or political issues, right? There are places in Ethiopia where you can express certain things, but if you pass the limits, the security services will come to your house. That's very common. So it really depends on where you are. But what's really interesting is that how, for me, what I find so fascinating is journalists that are in repressive states, how they adapt. The story is still told, right? Like maybe not by them, but how that information goes out, how the small tactics that they have. Like so, for instance, in Kenya, there was a first lady that came into a newsroom and slapped somebody, for instance. Yeah, for for writing something about her. Yeah, so these are these are the different things that you have to navigate. Some news agencies, like newspapers, for instance, would write. So the gossip section is the one that has the true meaning,
Oh,
but it's the gossip section. And it's and so that will be termed as the corridors of power, or like in the gossip room or something
yeah,
like
yeah.
that, right? So they found very innovative ways of shining light on the fact, so yeah, so they found very many alternative ways to adapt. But yeah.
I get from a ethical perspective, and obviously I understand why they need to do this. They're literally protecting their lives and probably their families' lives in a lot of cases, if by not going past that line. Um, but then I feel sad because then it means that somebody in uh I'm gonna say Tanzania because it's easier for me to say. Um, it sounds like you said it the proper way, but I'm gonna say Tanzania. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
had to pass that information on to somebody in the UK or somewhere else, and so the story gets told properly outside Tanzania, as opposed to the people who really need that information potentially not getting it. So that's obviously really unfortunate. And then you talking about the gossip section there reminded me of Men in Black, where Will Smith's like, oh well, how are we gonna find this guy? Tommy Lee Jones grabs the
Yeah.
National Enquirer, right, which is like literally just a rag, and going through is like, oh, this story right here, like this is where you get the real
Yeah.
news in the National Enquirer. I'm like, what? Hang on a second, what are you talking about? Like that's what it feels
Yep.
like. Like you got to go to the gossip section, the tabloids, to actually get the real scoop, which is again unfortunate. Like that sounds like that should be the front page news. But because somebody might go to
But
jail, you got to hide it
yeah.
and make it
Yeah, and
seem.
and the impact is really insane. Like I know journalists that have died. I know journalists that have been, that have fled and are living as, refugees somewhere else because of the work that they're doing. So the fact that they have to come up with this, tactics is actually to continue to tell the story, right? Like, so there's definitely courage even in them attempting to tell these stories, but it also comes at a cost. So they've innovatively found so many interesting ways of being able to do that. So the other, like, the flip side of this, for instance, would be Glenwood. So
Sorry,
like
where?
the head of the head of the Intercept.
Oh, Glenn Greenwald.
Yes,
Yeah.
Greenwald. Yes. So for instance, he's living in Brazil. Can he come back to the U.S.?
these
I don't
days,
know.
I'm pretty sure he
Like,
doesn't.
yeah. So
After
yeah, I mean,
Snowden and starting
exactly.
all that, yeah, I'm
Starting the
pretty sure he has
intercept.
stayed in Brazil for quite some time, or at least avoided the US for
Yes.
probably about a decade now.
Exactly. So now, like for me, he is, when we talk about press freedom, and so I use this to really contextualize to a lot of my friends in the North, is, is to say that, yeah, that's what press freedom is.
Yeah.
He should be able to come back to his country, and if he wants to. Snowden should not be persecuted in any ways, because what he did was actually was a true whistleblower, and many of the things that he did it to protect the public interest in so many ways. So there's no difference between him and the guy that has been forced out for me in Tanzania, to be honest, or the journalist that has to pass on information to somebody else so that they are not the one that end up in prison. So the reality is, what hurts the American government is maybe an essay and essay data, and and what hurts the Tanzanian government is information about corruption, because both are happening out of the preview of the law and there's no oversight, right? Like, so it's those things that I'm like, yeah, it's happening everywhere else. Yeah.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, it really feels like if people would just stop doing stupid things, um, and I use that term really broadly
Like,
in this case,
mm,
or trusted their population to understand, what they need in their lives, and to put
mm,
more or less the right people in power in order to achieve those things, which could be partially selfish, partially altruistic, um, we would all be in a better place. At least I like to think so. Maybe that's really naive, um, or really wishful thinking. But at the same time, if especially a corrupt government, regardless of where it is, if you need that much more money, maybe if you paid yourselves a little bit better, right? Just like voted for a little bit of a raise and say, well, if we're all paid a little bit better, we don't need to engage in corruption and that sort of thing. Um, maybe
mm.
that would be good. I don't know. Or on the other hand,
No,
if you had
I
much stronger
disagree.
laws, I know, but if you had much stronger laws for who can be a vendor, the processes that handing out especially multi-million dollar contracts needs to go through and that sort of thing, and a fully public register of where the money's going and who owns the corporations that are actually getting the money and all that, which of course this should all be happening already. If it's not, then you help root out a lot of that corruption, and ultimately at the end, and I've seen this happen in a variety of situations, whether it's corporate or government. And I used to be a counselor here in my local municipality for 4 years. There are certain thresholds where you don't need to get multiple quotes or put out a request for proposals and all that, and that's fine. It's usually 10,000 or 50,000 depending on the municipality. Beyond that, there should be more or less extreme transparency, especially if it's a numbered corporation, which we have many of them here and in the UK as well. Who owns the corporation? And if it's another corporation, who owns that corporation? And if it's another corporation, then who, like, get up to that level where we can actually see who owns this company. And if it's a public company, okay, well then it's a public company, and you can literally look up who the shareholders are. But if it's a private corporation, you should be able to go back and see who actually owns that thing, and therefore figure out, like, oh well, president so and CEO so and so went to high school together. And but if even if that's the case, if the RFP, the contract has very clear guidelines for how you got to this decision and it's defendable, then it's okay. If it's the lowest cost, or it meets the criteria the best based on the scoring matrix or whatever, that's okay. As long as everything else is in the clear, then it doesn't matter who owns it, because you actually have a process to defend, that is otherwise fairly transparent and defendable. It's when you can't do all that and somebody's just like, oh, here's a couple $1 million, right, go build this road, and it's only going to cost you 2 million, so you can keep the other 2 million for yourself. That's when you start to run into trouble. And and then people do stupid things. So Anyway,
Yeah, I mean, I'm not an expert on like corruption study or like advocate on like figuring that out. But what you explained sounds really simple and straightforward. But at the end of the day, that's not the case. Like we have, no, honestly, we
yeah,
have
yeah,
members of parliament that were getting like I think $7,000 or $8,000 per month, and in my part of the world, which is like shitloads of money, then the first thing that they did was increase their own salary to 10,000, and you're just like, but people have nothing to eat. What are we thinking about, guys?
yeah.
Please, like at least let's pretend to care. So it's all of those things where like it's like yeah, I mean. Yeah, like corruption is also not just handing out 2 million to you and you keep the 2 million and I'll it happens in many forms and many formats. So yeah, it's not governments are not smart, and they have their own private interests that they're there to run. Most of the governments I know, anyways, unless you're living in like New Zealand
Sure.
or I don't know.
Yeah,
Yeah,
actually,
I
the
I envy New
latest
Zealand.
corruption power index, I think it's called
Mm,
CPI, just came out.
mm,
Canada used to be top 10. We're number 11 right now, which I think is still pretty good because it covers 189 countries or so. New Zealand's near the top,
who's on the
Sweden, Norway.
who's on the bottom of the list?
Oh, sorry, corruption perception index. All right, so the latest corruption perceptions index, it's released annually by the Berlin-based Transparency International ever since
Okay.
1995,
Mm-hmm.
and rankings. So okay, bottom is, oh sorry, 179 countries, and I guess
Okay.
maybe unsurprisingly, the bottom of the list is South Sudan.
Okay, I mean, they don't have a government, functioning government. So who else? Like, let's list South
Okay,
Sudan.
so going up a little bit, they are actually tied with
Going up,
Somalia.
yeah. Okay,
Uh,
forget them as well.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
so South Sudan, Somalia, Syria, Yemen, Venezuela, Sudan, Equatorial Guinea or Guinea or
Okay.
whatever your pronunciation you
Yeah,
prefer.
Guinea.
Uh, I'm Portuguese,
Okay.
so it's always Guinea. Uh, or
Ah,
when I'm talking to
oh,
my parents, it is.
sorry. My bad.
No, it's okay. That's all right. Libya, North Korea, 170, not in last place. They are tied with Haiti and
Yeah.
the Democratic Republic of the Congo.
Go.
Uh, I'll name a few more because these are places that probably some of the people who are listening to this have never even heard of. Guinea-Bissau, Republic of the Congo, oh, the other Congo, Burundi, Afghanistan, Iraq, Eritrea, Comoros, Chad, Cambodia, and rounding out the bottom 20, Nicaragua.
Okay. So I like forget Yemen, Syria. I mean, like what there's no functioning state. Like literally, these guys have been bombed out of their existence.
Yeah.
So, but like a country like Democratic Republic of Congo, for instance, is like one of the resource richest country. Like Equatorial Guinea, like has so much oil.
Yeah.
Like so it's really, yeah. So and of course if you ask, like you look at Equatorial Guinea, the guy that has been ruling Equatorial Guinea for the past god knows how many years, 30 years, has been the same individual, right? Like so for a very long time.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's so he likes to be corrupt because living the high life in
Yeah. Say it's
Paris and
probably
in
rich.
Lisbon isn't. Yeah, because it's not like who wants to be poor? He doesn't want to be poor. He
Right.
wants to go to Lisbon every 3 weeks, enjoy his time in Portugal. No, so or yeah,
Hey,
they speak Portuguese, right?
keep Portugal out of
Anyways,
it.
yeah.
No,
Well,
if that's actually where he's going, well, then that's where he's going. But
I'm
um,
assuming I'm like these guys are in Europe every
yeah,
like
yeah.
yeah every few weeks.
The French
So
Riviera.
yeah, corruption sucks. Please don't get me started about the French. Where yeah.
Um, I see a couple of former Portuguese colonies: Mozambique's 149, Angola's 142,
Mm,
tied with Djibouti, Papua New Guinea, and Uganda at
mm-hmm,
142.
mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
I guess it's a little sad, but like the bottom of the list is not all that surprising. Mexico is
Mm,
124, but I guess they have so much going on in that country as well, even outside the
yeah.
government.
And then
That's
also like just in the habit of just pushing back, which is what I do best,
that's fine.
is really like, like for me, in many places, for instance, lobbying, like the fact that you can pay for somebody's campaign and they will pass laws that are of interest to you, for me is corruption. But
Mm,
in places like, if you are being rated based on that, many of these countries don't have that much lobbying,
right,
right? Like, so the US and the rest of the world will be on top of the list where
right,
you're
right,
like, yeah. But it also really depends on, do you have to give somebody a bribe to get government services?
right.
So I think yeah, it's not always linear. It's not always, pretty straightforward. But yeah, corruption sucks in all forms.
Yeah,
Conclusion.
corruption does absolutely suck. I will
Yes.
say in a very tiny defense of what you just said, United States number 25,
Mm. Ooh.
and that's down 2 from 2019, which was down 2 from 2018, which was down 4 from 2017. Like they are very very much sliding down the scale here. Um,
Yeah.
Canada's
So,
down. Canada, I think it looks like was
mm,
11 last year and this year, tied with Australia. But we fell 4 spots in 2019 and 1 in 2018. So we were much higher on the list. Um,
mm,
yeah, 2015
what are
we
you
went
guys
up 2 points,
doing?
and then we've
What
been
what?
sliding down.
Then you're just like, give me all that money. I don't know.
Well, I
That's
think it's
it.
really actually when you were talking about. We should probably wrap up soon. When you were talking about the um, salaries of members of parliament in Tanzania
Kenya.
earlier, was that U.S. dollars?
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah, yeah.
that's incredible because and I would say based on their position in the world, way too much money because um, well, not for everything, but certainly the cost of living, I
Yeah.
don't think justifies that sort of salary for a member of parliament. I have to imagine, half of that, you'd
So
still be pretty happy. 60 grand a year US. Most Americans don't make 60 grand a year US. Um,
but then now it's like, it's so I don't know, like, like I don't necessarily like, so I don't necessarily buy that, like, because I think people should be paid what they're worth, not necessarily like the cost of living might be cheap, but getting an apartment, a house is like super expensive. Like, it's also the lifestyle that you have, right? Like, so the inequality is also really high. So to live in a very safe environment, you'd have to pay double what somebody in the US would be paying for. So really, like, I think for me, the problem that I have with the fact that they're getting 10,000 is not because they can have a better life with 5,000. But it's more like, in terms of the issues that we're experiencing as a country, and the number of people that are not able to afford 3 meals a day, there should be other priorities set. Of course, like, you should get a fair government for your job, you should get a fair
sure.
compensation. But please, the first thing you pass when you get into parliament shouldn't be your salary.
Agreed.
Like, that also, like, it really indicates why you got the job, so,
Yeah.
and why
Yeah.
you applied for that position. So yeah, so it's a complex issue, definitely.
I'll do some more research on the cost of living in Tanzania later. But
Kenya.
I found a website that has some numbers. So anyway, all right. Last
Mm-hmm.
question, and you don't need to get into specifics.
Okay.
I'm more curious about tools and processes you might use depending on where you're living at the time and all that. What do you do to protect your privacy online?
Ooh, okay. Um, I would use, so I normally alternate browsers
Hmm.
so that not everybody has the same one. I try to log out of my Gmail most of the time. I use what we call the Privacy Badger,
Yeah.
I think it's called, yeah, from
EFF tool.
EFF. So that's on, yes, EFF tool, that's on my browser. I use, so my search engine is not Google most of the time. So I use DuckDuckGo. I cover my camera. I don't share my location. I don't, like, there's nothing shared by
Yeah.
default. So, I use PGP to encrypt sensitive email or some emails with people that I have that. I use Signal. so that WhatsApp doesn't know what I'm doing most of the time. But most people use WhatsApp, so you have to use WhatsApp again.
Sure, sure.
Yeah, so I try not to use the same email for a lot of stuff. I try to use a password manager. I have two-factor authentication. If you don't know what that is, 2FA, please Google it, get it. It's important. Yeah, those are some of the stuff that I do.
Good stuff.
And I close my curtains.
Good stuff. Good for you. All right, Berhan, thanks so
Cool.
much for
Yeah.
spending this time with us here today. Really, really appreciate all the insight you provided into things that are happening way outside of my borders, for better or worse, and that it's much harder to get insight into. So thank you very much for that and for all your time here today. And best of luck to you in the future with all of your endeavors.
Thank you so much. It was great chatting with you. Have a good one.
You too.